If a busy day ever leaves you almost forgetting what it feels like to slow your breathing, think of these lines as a small side path off the spinning wheel. It's like stumbling onto a quiet garden where the air feels softer and time moves just a little slower. In that garden, every story is like a leaf, simple but filled with life. On the hottest days, it's the shade that makes you pause and breathe again. We're not looking for strange miracles here. We're just reminding each other of what's always been around us. Life feels steadier when we stand on our own feet. Joy has a way of finding us when we open our hearts. And good fortune often shows up for those who are patient enough to plant seeds and wait. Let me start with an old story told in a way that feels close. There was a young man named Jack who had been stuck in a dull loop for years. Every day felt the same. One morning, he decided to do something different. He set out to find the wisest person in the country, a retired judge who had been living quietly in the mountains, and ask him why he couldn't seem to move forward in life. On his way, Jack met 3 people. The first was a fisherman who was always patching his old, battered boat. The second was a farmer wrestling with a barn door that wouldn't stay closed no matter how many times he fixed it. The third was a woman who worried deeply because her young daughter had never spoken a word since birth. Jack promised each of them that he'd ask the wise judge for advice. When Jack reached the mountain, the old judge listened carefully to all 3 problems. For the fisherman, he said it was time to stop patching the old boat and build a new one. For the farmer, he suggested replacing the hinges instead of making temporary repairs. And for the little girl, he said she should be brought to a place filled with music and the company of many people so she could feel safe enough to speak. Then Jack finally asked about his own struggle. The judge smiled and said, "You've already started fixing your life. You walked all this way not just for yourself but carrying the questions of others. Help them, and you'll find the help you need." On the way home, Jack shared the advice. The fisherman gave him a basket of fresh fish. The farmer lent him a sturdy wagon. The woman invited him to dinner, where he met her sister. Later, she became his wife. That journey taught him something simple but deep. The help we look for is often hidden in the help we give. This isn't something tied to one country or culture. In the United States, you can see it in the pay it forward movement, like when someone pays for the coffee of the person behind them and sparks a chain reaction that goes on for hours. But if you look closer, it's also about self-reliance. Ralph Waldo Emerson once wrote that believing in yourself and taking responsibility for your own path is the surest way to live. That doesn't mean shutting the world out. It means realizing that the strongest shoulder you can lean on is your own. There's another story about a young man who went hiking in the Rockies and got caught in a sudden snowstorm. At first, he sat under a pine tree waiting for rescue. But after a while, it hit him that no one knew where he was. So he gathered his courage, built a small shelter with what he had, and kept a fire going all night. By morning, rescuers found him. What stayed with him wasn't the moment of rescue. It was knowing he had kept himself alive when it mattered most. That's self-reliance. It's not about refusing to give or receive help. It's about knowing you can stand strong on your own. And once you can do that, many people choose to use their strength to lift others. Take Charles Chuck Feeney, co-founder of Duty Free Shoppers. He spent his life quietly giving away over $8 billion, keeping just enough to live simply. He called it giving while living, and inspired people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett to commit at least half their wealth to charity through the Giving Pledge. You might not agree with every detail of his method, but the message is clear. Money has its greatest value when it's used to solve real problems. Some of the biggest charitable foundations in the U.S. take this even further, tackling long-term challenges. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, working with Rotary International and the WHO, has helped reduce global polio cases by more than 99% since the 1980s, bringing the disease to the edge of eradication. If that feels far away, remember that every huge effort starts small. Jack's climb up the mountain started with one step and someone else's question in his pocket. Generosity comes in all shapes. A New York City police officer once bought a pair of shoes for a homeless man on a freezing night, not for attention but simply because he saw the need. He was embarrassed when the moment was noticed. Quiet acts like this are what hold communities together. A neighbor mowing the lawn for an elderly couple. A teacher buying supplies with their own money. a stranger pulling over to help someone fix their car. The way we act when no one is watching can matter just as much as what we do in public. In parts of the Midwest, farm stands sometimes leave out an honor box. You take what you need, leave what it's worth, and most people do exactly that. The same trust shows up when you watch a friend's kids for the evening, lend out your tools, or drop off a meal when someone's sick. Humility is another value that can get lost in a culture that loves self-confidence. Fred Rogers, the host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, even at the height of his fame, still handwrote letters to viewers, remembered every crew member's name, and truly listened when someone spoke. He once said, "There isn't anyone you couldn't learn to love once you've heard their story." Humility also means being willing to admit you're wrong. Coach Tony Dungy was known not just for winning games but for taking responsibility when things went wrong, protecting his players from criticism, and focusing on how to improve. Listening, whether in leadership or everyday life, is rare but powerful. A New York subway conductor once began greeting each passenger over the loudspeaker, turning tense commutes into something warmer with just a few words. On the other hand, competition can sometimes take a toll. The phrase "keeping up with the Joneses" is a reminder that constant comparison to your neighbors only leaves you exhausted. Maya Angelou once said, "What is for me will be mine." That line frees you from the endless race and makes it easier to truly celebrate someone else's success. Then there's resilience. Bethany Hamilton lost her arm to a shark at 13 but was back in the water a month later. 2 years later, she won a surfing championship. She didn't deny her loss but refused to let it define her. Wisdom often shows up in creative problem-solving. In the 1970s, NASA saved the Skylab space station by inventing a giant umbrella-like heat shield. In 1982, during the Tylenol crisis, Johnson & Johnson pulled every single bottle from store shelves to protect customers, then rebuilt trust from the ground up. Courage sometimes comes at a personal cost. Frank Serpico exposed corruption in the NYPD even though it meant being shunned by fellow officers. His stand led to reforms and made him a symbol of integrity. In sports, there's the story of a 2008 softball game where 2 opposing players carried injured Sarah Tukalski around the bases so she could finish her first and only home run, even though it meant their team would lose. That's sportsmanship beyond the scoreboard. Listening and making space for others to grow is another form of wisdom. Abraham Lincoln brought political rivals into his cabinet so he could hear every perspective before making decisions. In small towns, people gather at diners or barbershops to talk about the weather or politics. Not to win arguments, but to keep connections alive. Some lessons only come after loss, like Midwestern farmers who plant again after droughts or floods. Gratitude often shows itself in simple gestures. A boss gives a young employee a new car after hearing he walked 21 miles to work on his first day. Thank you cards and baked goods show up at fire stations after a rescue. Douglas Conant, CEO of Campbell's Soup, wrote more than 30,000 handwritten notes to employees, lifting morale and performance. During the 2020 pandemic, a Chicago restaurant owner kept paying staff even after closing, remembering how they had stood by him when the place first struggled. Generosity often comes from those with the least to give. In Philadelphia, a homeless man gave his last $20 to help a stranded driver buy gas. All of these small stories weave into a single thread: persistence, kindness, humility, gratitude, creativity, courage. They twist together into something strong enough to carry a meaningful life. These values don't only live in headlines or history books. They show up in quiet, everyday moments, when the giver and the receiver might not even know each other's names. When Hurricane Harvey struck Texas in 2017, thousands of people were stranded in rising floodwaters. Photos spread of fishing boats, jet skis, and inflatable rafts weaving through submerged streets to reach them. Many of the people steering those boats had driven hundreds of miles from other states, bringing fuel and food. They refused payment. There was no big organization telling them to go. It was just neighbors helping neighbors, even if those neighbors lived far away. That same spirit is alive after Midwest snowstorms, when people with plows clear driveways for the elderly or those who can't do it themselves, often without being asked. It shows up after wildfires in California, when communities organize donations and offer shelter to families who've lost their homes. The bonds formed in those moments often outlast the disaster itself. One summer in New York City, a subway train stalled between stations in sweltering heat. There was no air conditioning, and no one knew when it would start moving again. At first, passengers sat in silence, just trying to get through it. Then someone began passing around a bottle of water. Another person offered snacks. A few shared phone chargers. One man pulled out a guitar, and the cramped, overheated train turned into a small concert. By the time the train finally moved again, people were exchanging phone numbers and making plans to meet. Kindness has a way of starting chain reactions. In Boston in 2012, one customer at a coffee shop found their drink already paid for by the person ahead of them. They decided to do the same for the person behind them. That chain went on for more than 1,000 customers. No one knew who started it, and that was the point. The good was done without the need for credit. In some towns, every Christmas brings a secret Santa who quietly pays off layaway balances for families who need a little help. The people picking up their items are stunned to find their bill already paid. They can't even thank the giver, which somehow makes the gift feel even more pure. Sometimes kindness works best when it's a little more organized. After September 11th, blood banks in the U.S. received so many donations in the first few days that they couldn't use it all right away. The Red Cross asked people to stagger their donations over the next few weeks so the supply would last. People listened, and hospitals had blood not only for the first wave of patients but for months afterward. Kindness also comes in the form of time and shared experience. Big Brothers Big Sisters matches children with adult mentors who spend time with them, listen to them, and help them grow. Some of these relationships last a lifetime. Sometimes help arrives so perfectly timed it feels like it was meant to be. A driver in Colorado lost control during a snowstorm and slid into a ditch. With no cell signal and no one else in sight, he was starting to lose hope when the headlights of an old pickup appeared. A farmer got out, pulled his car free, refused any payment and simply said, "I was helped the same way once. Now it's my turn." Acts like that don't just solve an immediate problem. They help create a culture where helping isn't rare. They shape how communities see themselves. In America, the word legacy doesn't just mean monuments or names in history books. A legacy can be the ripple effect of a life, something that continues long after a person is gone. And it often starts small. Fred Rogers, the host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, spent decades teaching kindness, acceptance, and emotional honesty to millions of children. When he died in 2003, thousands of tributes came from ordinary viewers who said his words made them feel seen and loved. His true legacy wasn't the number of episodes he filmed, but the compassion he planted in others. In rural parts of the Midwest, legacy often comes through the land itself. A grandfather might teach his grandchild not only how to plant corn, but why it's important to keep the soil healthy. He's passing down more than farming skills. He's passing down a relationship with the earth that can last for generations. In education, Jamie Escalante became famous for inspiring his students in Los Angeles to take and pass advanced placement calculus, even when others doubted them. His influence continues in the teachers he inspired. Some legacies are so big their impact isn't fully seen by the person who built them. Harriet Tubman escaped slavery and led dozens to freedom through the Underground Railroad. She didn't live to see the civil rights milestones her courage helped make possible, but her name remains a symbol of bravery and moral clarity. Chuck Feeney, the billionaire who gave away almost all his wealth, left behind universities, hospitals, and health programs that will continue to help people for generations. He died with almost nothing in personal possessions, but his impact will last far beyond his lifetime. Everyday people leave legacies too. A teacher planting trees year after year, leaving behind shaded playgrounds. A mechanic teaching teens how to repair cars, giving them a skill that can lead to steady work. A neighbor starting an annual food drive that becomes part of a town's tradition. In the arts, Aretha Franklin and Johnny Cash left more than music. They left inspiration for future generations of musicians. Writers like Maya Angelou and John Steinbeck still move readers long after their deaths. Some legacies are born from resilience. After September 11th, many first responders became ill from their time at Ground Zero. Some spent the rest of their lives fighting for health care for others in their position. Even after they passed, the protections they won continued to help thousands. The common thread in all these stories is consistency. Living your values so fully that they outlast your name. We may never see the full impact of our lives while we're here, but what matters is planting seeds anyway, even if we don't know when or if they'll grow. When we look back at stories of persistence through hardship, kindness between strangers, courage when silence would have been easier, hope driving innovation, and legacies built over time, one truth emerges. Ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose to act. That belief doesn't come from never failing or always knowing exactly what to do. It comes from starting even when you feel unsure. Chris Gardner didn't know if his unpaid internship would lead to a job, but he still showed up every day while sleeping in shelters at night. Wilma Rudolph didn't know if her once paralyzed legs could carry her to the Olympics, but she trained every day. Volunteers who paddled into the floodwaters during Hurricane Harvey didn't know how deep the water was or what they'd find, but they went anyway. In every case, the first step wasn't certainty. It was will. Kindness in these stories is both the cause and the effect. One act often leads to another, like the Dunkin' customers who kept paying for the next person's order for hours, or the Colorado farmer who pulled a stranger's car out of the snow because someone had once done the same for him. Kindness has a secret. It grows when it's shared. Courage works the same way. It isn't reserved for a rare few. It's a choice anyone can make in the moment it's needed. Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat. A student standing up for a bullied classmate. A pilot landing safely on the Hudson River. Each of these moments sent ripples outward, making it easier for others to see doing the right thing as the natural choice. Hope fuels innovation. NASA engineers didn't give up when Apollo 13 malfunctioned. Teachers found ways to keep students learning online. Small businesses reimagined themselves to survive. Hope isn't about blind optimism. It's about staying committed to finding a way forward. And legacy is what comes when you live these values consistently. Fred Rogers spent decades planting seeds of kindness. Harriet Tubman risked her life to bring others to freedom. Jamie Escalante believed in his students until they believed in themselves. Legacy isn't only for the famous. Anyone who lives in a way that lifts others can leave one. These stories aren't meant to be admired from a distance. They're invitations to join in. You don't need wealth to be generous, power to be brave, or genius to be inventive. What you need is the willingness to keep moving, to help when you see the chance, to speak up when it matters, to try even when the outcome is uncertain, to plant a seed for the future, knowing you might not be around to see it grow. These qualities rarely stand alone. Perseverance can lead to kindness. Kindness can inspire courage. Courage can spark hope. And hope can build a legacy. They feed into one another, and the more you practice one, the stronger the others become. Think about the ripple you want to create. Could be in your family, your neighborhood, your school, or your workplace. Maybe it's a project you've been putting off. Maybe it's a conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's a habit you've been meaning to start. Big change often begins with small steps. One day, someone might tell a story about you. That you helped without being asked. That you kept going when quitting would have been easier. That you did something simply because you believed it was worth doing. Even if you never hear that story, it will live on in the people and places you've touched. In the end, legacy isn't about how long your name is remembered. It's about how deeply your impact is felt. And that's something anyone can start building right now. When people think about perseverance, they often picture heroic moments. But many of the most powerful examples come from people whose names most of us will never know. Chris Gardner, the man whose story inspired the pursuit of happiness, was once a struggling salesman, homeless with his young son. Yet he pursued an unpaid internship with relentless dedication. That commitment led to a stable job, the founding of his own firm, and eventually becoming a millionaire. His life is a reminder of what can happen when you refuse to quit, even when the odds are stacked against you. Wilma Rudolph's journey tells the same truth in a different way. Born prematurely in 1940 and paralyzed by polio as a child, she was told she'd never walk again. Through years of therapy and determination, she not only walked but became the fastest woman in the world, winning 3 Olympic gold medals. She proved that so-called impossible limits can be broken. American culture often embraces second chances. There's the man once sentenced to life in prison who now runs a vocational training program for at-risk youth, using his past as both a warning and a source of hope. There's Colonel Sanders, who launched KFC at the age of 65 after a long list of failed jobs, proving it's never too late to start over. In Silicon Valley, failure is often treated like a stepping stone. James Dyson went through 5,126 prototypes before creating the bagless vacuum. Today, Dyson is one of the most respected names in innovation. In sports, Michael Jordan has said it was his thousands of missed shots and lost games that made him successful. Victory, in his words, comes from continuing after failure. Some battles require patience measured in decades. The movement for marriage equality in the United States won in 2015 after thousands of protests, legal battles, and personal conversations around kitchen tables. Or take the story of a man in a rural town who was told it would take a year to walk again after a devastating accident. He trained every single day and walked across the football field at his daughter's graduation in just 7 months. Perseverance isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it's just the quiet, daily work that eventually leads to something extraordinary. That same perseverance keeps communities alive through hard times. In rural America, you'll hear stories of years-long droughts or floods wiping out crops. Farmers lose entire seasons but show up again when it's time to plant. They don't plant because they're sure of a harvest. They plant because they know that without planting, there will definitely be nothing. It's a kind of practical faith, accepting the risk while holding on to hope. Gratitude often appears in these stories, sometimes so quietly only the people involved notice. In Detroit, when a young man's car broke down, he walked 21 miles to make it to his first day of work. When his boss heard about it, he didn't just shake his hand. He gave him a new car. It wasn't just a gift of transportation. It was a way of saying, "I see your effort and I value it." Gratitude and generosity often travel together. After a rescue, small-town firefighters are sometimes surprised with handwritten notes or trays of cookies. There are no cameras, no headlines, just a quiet acknowledgement that someone risked themselves for others. In business, gratitude can shape an entire culture. Douglas Conant, when he was CEO of Campbell Soup, wrote more than 30,000 handwritten notes to employees. Each one was personal. Each one was sincere. The result was higher morale and stronger performance. Generosity can grow from a debt of kindness. In 2020, when the pandemic forced his restaurant to close, a Chicago owner kept paying his employees in full. He remembered how they had stayed with him during the early years when the place struggled to survive. Generosity can also come from those with almost nothing. In Philadelphia, a homeless man gave his last $20 to help a woman who was stranded without gas. That moment sparked a fundraiser that gave him a fresh start. Even though the story became more complicated later, its beginning was a clear reminder that the value of a gift isn't in the dollar amount, but in the sacrifice it represents. Communities show generosity in collective action too. Parents raise funds for school uniforms and sports equipment. Neighbors organize benefit dinners when a family loses their home to a fire, bringing food, clothes, and whatever else they can spare. Local musicians hold concerts to help pay for someone's medical treatment. No one is required to help, but many choose to, knowing they might one day need help themselves. When it comes to building a meaningful life, many imagine a sweeping, dramatic journey. In reality, it's usually built from small, consistent contributions. The poet Mary Oliver once asked, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" For some, the answer is exploration. For others, raising a family, starting a business, or mentoring the next generation. Meaning comes from choosing to devote time and energy to what matters, and to what helps others. In American culture, building a meaningful life often means balancing ambition with sustainability. People have learned, sometimes the hard way, that burning out in pursuit of a goal can make the goal itself disappear. The hustle lifestyle was once celebrated, But more people now aim for sustainable ambition, working hard without sacrificing health, relationships, or peace of mind. Silicon Valley founders have learned to step back before burnout. Corporate leaders are investing in mental health. The lesson is clear. Success isn't just about what you achieve, but about how you live while you achieve it. Jim Goodnight, co-founder and CEO of SAS Institute, offers one example of long-term vision. For decades, he's built a workplace that values employee well-being, with on-site healthcare, childcare, and flexible schedules. The company still turns a profit. His philosophy is simple. If you treat employees as if they make a difference, they will. It's proof that investing in people works over the long run. The truth is, building a meaningful life is rarely a straight road. It's more like weaving a tapestry from hundreds of small threads. Each thread might be an act of gratitude, a gesture of generosity, or a decision to put people on equal footing with profit. Over time, you can look back and see the bigger picture. In that picture, qualities like perseverance, kindness, humility, gratitude, creativity, and courage aren't separate. They're intertwined, giving the fabric its strength. Perseverance has always been part of the American story. From the pioneers crossing mountains to settle the West, to modern entrepreneurs starting companies in their garages, it's a trait that has shaped generations. History books often highlight famous names, but the stories that move us most often belong to people we might never hear about. Chris Gardner is one of them. In the early 1980s, he was a failed salesman, homeless with his young son. Every day he put on a suit, carried his papers, and went to an unpaid internship at a brokerage firm. At night, he slept in shelters or even public restrooms. He had no guarantee of being hired, but he kept showing up. Eventually, he was offered a position, started his own company, and became a millionaire. His story isn't about money. It's about the strength it takes to keep going when everything tells you to stop. Wilma Rudolph's path was just as unlikely. Born prematurely in 1940, she contracted polio as a child and was told she'd never walk again. Through years of therapy and determination, she not only learned to walk, she became the fastest woman alive, winning 3 Olympic gold medals. She didn't just break records. She broke the limits that others tried to place on her. Second chances run deep in American culture. A man once serving a life sentence was released and went on to lead a vocational program for at-risk youth, using his own story as proof that change is possible. Colonel Sanders started franchising KFC at 65, after a lifetime of failed ventures, showing that it's never too late to begin again. In Silicon Valley, failure isn't the end of the road. It's part of the process. James Dyson built more than 5,000 prototypes before perfecting the bagless vacuum. Michael Jordan has said it was his missed shots and lost games that drove his success. The common thread is resilience, the ability to get back up and keep going. Some struggles take decades. The fight for marriage equality in the U.S. spanned generations before winning in 2015. There's also the story of a man in a rural town who was told he'd need a year to walk again after a car accident. 7 months later, after training every day, he walked across the football field at his daughter's graduation. Perseverance doesn't always look dramatic. Often it's the quiet choice to keep showing up until something changes. Kindness between strangers is hard to schedule, but you know it when you see it. In 2017, when Hurricane Harvey hit Texas, images of hundreds of private fishing boats, jet skis, and rafts moving through flooded streets became iconic. There was no command from above, no official plan. Just people rescuing people, even if they had to travel hundreds of miles to do it. In the Midwest, when heavy snow falls, people with plows often clear driveways for elderly or disabled neighbors without being asked. After wildfires in California, communities rally almost immediately, opening homes, donating money, and making sure those who lost everything have a safe place to stay. Kindness can also bloom in ordinary settings. One summer day in New York, a subway train got stuck between stations in sweltering heat. At first, passengers sat in silence, each enduring the discomfort alone. Then someone offered a bottle of water. Another person handed out snacks. A few shared phone chargers. A man pulled out a guitar, and suddenly the train car turned into an impromptu concert. By the time the train started moving again, strangers were swapping phone numbers and making plans to meet. Kindness has a way of multiplying. In Boston in 2012, one coffee shop customer paid for the drink of the person behind them. That chain lasted for more than 1,000 customers. In small towns, secret Santas quietly pay off layaway balances for families in need. The recipients pick up their items without the burden of debt and without knowing who to thank. Sometimes kindness is most effective when coordinated. After September 11th, U.S. blood banks were flooded with donations in just a few days. So many, in fact, that they couldn't all be used immediately. The Red Cross asked people to spread their donations out over the following weeks to keep the supply steady. People listened, ensuring hospitals had what they needed for months, not just days. And then there are moments when help arrives with uncanny timing. In Colorado, a driver stranded in a snowstorm, out of cell service, was beginning to lose hope when an old pickup appeared. A farmer stepped out, towed the car free, refused payment, and simply said, "I was helped like this once. Now it's my turn." These moments, big or small, turn helping into a habit rather than an exception. They strengthen the sense that a community is something you build together. This same spirit flows into the idea of legacy. In its purest form, legacy isn't about having your name carved in stone. It's about the lasting effect of your actions. Fred Rogers spent decades talking directly to millions of children about kindness and acceptance. When he died in 2003, the outpouring of tributes wasn't about the number of episodes he made. It was about how people felt because of him. In the Midwest, a family's legacy might be the land they farmed for generations. A grandfather teaching a grandchild how to care for the soil isn't just passing on a skill. He's passing on a sense of stewardship. In classrooms, teachers like Jamie Escalante inspire students to believe in themselves, opening doors they never thought possible. Harriet Tubman's courage in leading people to freedom through the Underground Railroad changed the course of history. She didn't live to see all the rights her work helped win, but her name remains a symbol of bravery and principle. Chuck Feeney gave away nearly all his wealth to build schools, hospitals, and health programs, living simply and leaving behind benefits that will last for generations. Ordinary people leave legacies too. A teacher planting trees every year, a mechanic teaching young people a trade, a neighbor starting a food drive that becomes a tradition. In the arts, the work of Aretha Franklin, Johnny Cash, Maya Angelou, and John Steinbeck continues to inspire long after their passing. Some legacies are built through resilience. After September 11th, first responders who became ill from working at Ground Zero spent the rest of their lives fighting for healthcare for their peers. Even after their deaths, the protections they secured continued to help others. What ties these stories together is consistency. Living your values so fully that they continue to shape the world even when you're gone. We don't have to wait until the end of our lives to think about legacy. It's being created every single day through the choices we make. It's in the small acts, like helping someone without expecting anything back, keeping a promise even when it's inconvenient, sharing knowledge with someone who needs it, or speaking up when it would be easier to stay silent. A person's influence isn't limited to the years they're alive. An idea can live on in the way people think. A lesson can be passed down through generations. A single act of kindness can ripple outward in ways the giver will never see. When you help a child believe in themselves, you're not just shaping their life. You're also influencing everyone they go on to help. When you stand up for what's right, you're not only addressing the moment in front of you. You're showing others what courage looks like so they can recognize it when their turn comes. That's how even an ordinary life can leave ripples that last for decades. And the most beautiful part is that creating a meaningful legacy doesn't require fame, power, or great wealth. It requires living consistently by the values you believe in. The ripples from a single act can travel through people you'll never meet, touch places you'll never go, and last far longer than you imagine. Look closely and you'll see that most of these stories begin in the same place. An ordinary person decides to do something simply because they believe it's worth doing. There's no perfect plan, no guarantee of success, just the decision to step forward. Chris Gardner chose to keep showing up for his unpaid internship while sleeping in a shelter with his son. Wilma Rudolph trained every day, even after doctors told her she'd never walk. Volunteers during Hurricane Harvey paddled into unknown floodwaters because they believed there were people who still needed help. In all of these moments, the first step wasn't taken out of certainty. It was taken out of will and belief. Kindness works in a circle. Someone helps another person, and that person, in turn, helps someone else. At a Dunkin' Donuts, customers once paid for the person behind them for hours on end. In Colorado, a farmer pulled a stranger's car from a snowbank simply because someone had done the same for him in the past. Kindness doesn't shrink when it's shared. It grows. Courage works the same way. It's not a rare trait reserved for a select few. It's a choice that anyone can make when the moment calls for it. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. A student stepped in to defend a classmate from bullying. A pilot landed safely on the Hudson River after both engines failed. Each of these moments sent ripples outward, making it more natural for others to step forward when it's their turn. Hope is the driving force behind innovation. When Apollo 13 malfunctioned, NASA engineers refused to give up. They found a way to bring the crew home safely. When schools shut down, teachers quickly created online lessons to keep students learning. When small businesses faced the threat of closing, they found new ways to serve customers and stay afloat. Hope isn't naive optimism. It's the determination to keep searching for solutions when the odds aren't clear. Legacy is what happens when you live these values day after day. Fred Rogers spent decades planting seeds of kindness. Harriet Tubman risked her life again and again to lead others to freedom. Jamie Escalante believed in his students until they believed in themselves. Legacy isn't only for people whose names appear in history books. Anyone who lives in a way that lifts others can create one. These stories aren't here for us to admire from a distance. They're invitations to step into the work ourselves. You don't need to be rich to be generous. You don't need to hold power to be brave. You don't need to be a genius to be creative. All you need is the willingness to keep moving forward, whether that means helping, speaking up, trying, or planting a seed for the future. These qualities often appear together. Perseverance leads to kindness. Kindness sparks courage. Courage gives birth to hope. Hope builds legacy. They feed each other, and the more you practice one, the stronger you grow in the others. Think about the ripple you want to send out into the world. It might be in your family, your neighborhood, your school, or your workplace. It could be a project you've been avoiding, a conversation you've been putting off, or a good habit you've been meaning to start. Big changes often begin with the smallest steps. One day, someone might tell a story about you, that you helped when no one asked, that you kept going when walking away would have been easier, that you did something just because you believed it mattered. And even if you never hear that story, it will live on in the people and places you touched. In the end, legacy isn't measured by how long your name is remembered. It's measured by how deeply your impact is felt. And that's something anyone can start building right now. When people think of perseverance, they often imagine grand, dramatic tales. But the truth is, many of the most powerful examples come from people whose names never make the news. Chris Gardner, the man behind The Pursuit of Happiness, was once a struggling salesman, homeless with his young son. He pursued an unpaid internship with relentless dedication, and it eventually led to stability, success, and the ability to help others. Wilma Rudolph, born prematurely in 1940 and paralyzed by polio as a child, was told she would never walk. Years of therapy and unshakable willpower proved everyone wrong. She not only walked but became the fastest woman alive, bringing home 3 Olympic gold medals. Second chances are deeply woven into American life. A man once serving life in prison now leads a program teaching trades to at-risk youth, turning his own past into a tool for change. Colonel Sanders launched the KFC franchise at 65 after decades of failure, showing that a late start can still lead to lasting impact. In Silicon Valley, failure is often worn like a badge of honor. James Dyson created more than 5,000 prototypes before perfecting his bagless vacuum. Now, his name is synonymous with innovation. Michael Jordan has famously said his missed shots and lost games were what fueled his success, reminding us that victory often grows from loss. Some battles stretch across years, even decades. The movement for marriage equality in the United States finally won in 2015, but only after countless protests, court cases, and quiet conversations around kitchen tables. There's also the story of a man in a rural town who was told it would take a year to walk again after a serious accident. He trained every day and crossed the football field at his daughter's graduation in just 7 months. Perseverance doesn't always look like a headline. Often, it's just steady, unglamorous effort that eventually turns into something extraordinary. That same persistence is what keeps communities going through hard times. In rural America, farmers sometimes face years-long droughts or floods that wipe out entire crops. They still head back into the fields when it's time to plant again. They do it not because they're certain of a harvest, but because they know that if they don't plant, there will be nothing at all. It's a kind of faith built on practicality, accepting the risks while holding on to hope. Gratitude often slips quietly into stories like these. In Detroit, when a young man's car broke down, he walked 21 miles to get to his first day of work. When his boss found out, he didn't just shake his hand or give him praise. He gave him a new car. It wasn't about the material gift alone. It was a way of saying, "I see your effort and I value it." Gratitude and generosity often walk side by side. In small towns, firefighters sometimes receive handwritten thank you notes or trays of cookies after a rescue. These moments aren't staged for social media. They're simply heartfelt acknowledgments of someone putting themselves at risk for others. In the business world, gratitude can change an entire culture. Douglas Conant, while serving as CEO of Campbell Soup, wrote more than 30,000 handwritten notes to employees. Every note was personal, every word sincere. The result wasn't just higher morale. It was stronger performance and deeper trust across the company. Sometimes generosity is born from a debt of kindness. In 2020, when the pandemic forced his Chicago restaurant to close, the owner kept paying his employees in full. He remembered how they had stayed by his side when the business was struggling in its early years, and he wanted to do the same for them. Generosity can also come from those who have almost nothing. In Philadelphia, a homeless man gave his last $20 to help a woman stranded without gas. That act sparked a fundraiser that gave him a fresh start. The story later became more complicated, but the beginning was a pure reminder that the value of a gift isn't measured in dollars, but in the sacrifice it represents. Communities often express generosity in collective ways. Parents work together to raise money for school uniforms or equipment. Neighbors organize benefit dinners after a family loses their home to a fire. Local musicians hold concerts to pay for someone's surgery. These moments aren't required by anyone, yet people step forward, knowing they might one day be on the receiving end. When we picture a meaningful life, we might imagine something sweeping and dramatic. But in reality, it's usually built from a long series of small, consistent contributions. Poet Mary Oliver once asked, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" For some, that answer is traveling the world. For others, it's raising a family, starting a business, or mentoring the next generation. Meaning comes from intentionally devoting your time and energy to what matters and to what helps others. In American culture, building a meaningful life often means balancing ambition with sustainability. Many have learned, sometimes through burnout, that chasing a goal without caring for health, relationships, or peace of mind can lead to losing the very thing they were striving for. The hustle culture that was once glorified has begun to shift toward what some call sustainable ambition, working hard, but in a way that lasts. Silicon Valley founders have learned to step back before reaching burnout. More companies are investing in mental health programs for employees. The lesson is that success isn't just about what you achieve. It's also about how you live while you're achieving it. One example of long-term vision is Jim Goodnight, co-founder and CEO of SAS Institute. For decades, he has built a workplace centered on employee well-being, with on-site healthcare, childcare, and flexible schedules. And the company continues to turn a profit. His belief is simple. If you treat employees as if they make a difference, they will. His approach is proof that investing in people works, both in the short term and over the long haul. Building a meaningful life is rarely a straight, neatly paved road. It's more like weaving a tapestry from countless threads, each representing a small act of kindness, a decision to keep going, or a choice to put people first. As time passes, you can step back and see how those threads create a bigger picture. In that picture, perseverance, kindness, humility, gratitude, creativity, and courage aren't separate elements. They're intertwined, each making the other stronger. Perseverance has been part of the American identity since the earliest days. From pioneers crossing mountains to settle the West, to entrepreneurs starting businesses in their garages, it's a trait that shows up again and again. History celebrates the big names, but some of the most moving examples come from people whose stories might never be written down. Chris Gardner's story is one of them. In the early 1980s, he was a failed salesman, homeless with his young son. Every morning, he dressed in a suit and went to an unpaid internship at a brokerage firm. At night, he slept in shelters or even public restrooms. There was no promise of a job, but he kept showing up. Eventually, he was hired, started his own company, and built a successful life. Wilma Rudolph's journey is just as striking. Born prematurely in 1940, she was paralyzed by polio as a child and told she'd never walk. She didn't just walk, she ran. And she became the fastest woman in the world, winning 3 Olympic gold medals. Stories like these show that perseverance is often less about grand gestures and more about the decision to keep moving forward, one day at a time. Second chances also run deep in American culture. A man who once served a life sentence in prison was released and went on to lead a vocational training program for at-risk youth, using his own life as proof that change is possible. Colonel Sanders, after a lifetime of failed ventures, started franchising KFC at the age of 65, proving that a late start can still lead to something lasting. In Silicon Valley, failure isn't seen as the end. It's a stepping stone. James Dyson built more than 5,000 prototypes before finally perfecting the bagless vacuum. Now his name is recognized around the world. Michael Jordan has said it was his missed shots and lost games that pushed him to work harder. Those losses became the foundation for his success. Some struggles take decades to resolve. The fight for marriage equality in the U.S. lasted for generations before it succeeded in 2015. There's the story of a man in a rural town who was told it would take a year before he could walk again after a terrible accident. He trained daily, and 7 months later, he crossed the football field at his daughter's graduation. Perseverance doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's just the steady act of showing up every single day. Kindness between strangers can't be planned, but it's unforgettable when it happens. When Hurricane Harvey struck Texas in 2017, hundreds of private fishing boats, jet skis, and inflatable rafts filled flooded streets. These people weren't sent by an organization. They weren't paid. They just came, some from hundreds of miles away, to help rescue strangers. In the Midwest, when heavy snow falls, people with plows often clear the driveways of elderly or disabled neighbors without being asked. After California wildfires, communities organize quickly, opening their homes, donating supplies, and helping families who have lost everything. Sometimes kindness blooms in the most ordinary places. In New York City, a subway train once got stuck between stations on a sweltering summer day. At first, the passengers sat in silence. Then someone passed around a bottle of water. Another person shared snacks. A few people offered their phone chargers. And then a man pulled out a guitar, turning the hot, crowded car into a small concert. By the time the train started moving again, people were exchanging phone numbers and making plans to meet. Kindness can ripple far beyond the moment. In Boston in 2012, one coffee shop customer decided to pay for the person behind them. That act kept going for more than 1,000 customers. In some small towns, every Christmas brings a secret Santa who pays off layaway balances for families in need. The recipients never know who helped them, and maybe that's what makes the gift even more meaningful. Sometimes kindness works best when it's coordinated. After the September 11th attacks, blood banks in the U.S. received such an overwhelming number of donations that they couldn't use it all at once. The Red Cross asked people to stagger their donations over weeks instead of days, ensuring a steady supply for hospitals in the months that followed. People listened, and then there are moments when help arrives at exactly the right time. In Colorado, during a snowstorm, a driver slid into a ditch with no cell signal. Just as he was about to give up hope, the headlights of an old pickup appeared. A farmer climbed out, pulled his car free, refused payment and said, "I was helped the same way once. Now it's my turn." Acts like these help create a culture where helping is second nature, not an exception. This same spirit flows naturally into legacy. In its truest sense, legacy isn't about statues or awards. It's about the lasting effects of a life. Fred Rogers spent decades speaking to children about kindness and acceptance. When he died in 2003, the tributes that poured in weren't about his career statistics. They were about the way he made people feel. In rural Midwest towns, legacy can be the land itself. A grandfather teaches his grandchild how to plant corn and care for the soil, passing down not only a skill but a deep respect for the earth. In education, Jamie Escalante inspired his students to believe in themselves, and his influence continues through the teachers he inspired. Harriet Tubman's bravery changed history. She led dozens to freedom through the Underground Railroad, risking her own life again and again. She didn't live to see all the progress her courage helped spark, but her name remains a symbol of strength and moral clarity. Chuck Feeney gave away nearly all of his wealth to build schools, hospitals, and health programs. He lived simply, flying coach, owning no home, and leaving behind a legacy that will continue to serve people for generations. Everyday people create legacies too. A teacher plants trees with students year after year, leaving shade in playgrounds long after she's gone. A mechanic teaches teenagers how to fix cars, giving them a skill that can lead to stable work. A neighbor starts a yearly food drive that becomes part of the town's tradition. In the arts, Aretha Franklin, Johnny Cash, Maya Angelou, and John Steinbeck all left behind work that continues to inspire because it carried not just talent but their values, struggles, and humanity. Some legacies are born from resilience. After September 11th, many first responders became ill from working at Ground Zero. Some spent the rest of their lives fighting for healthcare for their peers. Even after they passed, the protections they secured continued to help thousands. The common thread in all of these examples is consistency. Living your values so that they last beyond your own lifetime. We don't have to wait for the final chapter of our lives to think about legacy. It's being shaped every day in the way we treat people, the promises we keep, the knowledge we pass on, and the moments we choose to stand up for what matters. A person's influence isn't limited to the time they're alive. Ideas can outlive us. A lesson can be carried forward for generations. A single act of kindness can keep moving through people we'll never meet. When you help a child believe in themselves, you're not just changing their life. You might be changing the lives of everyone they'll go on to help. When you speak up for what's right, you're not only changing the present. You're showing others how to find their own courage when the moment comes. That's how an ordinary life can leave extraordinary ripples. The most beautiful thing about it is that building a meaningful legacy doesn't require fame or fortune. It requires living by your values, day in and day out. The ripples from one action can touch places you'll never go and last longer than you can imagine. If you look closely, most of these stories start the same way. An ordinary person makes a decision simply because it feels worth doing. There's no perfect plan, no certainty about the outcome, just the choice to act. Chris Gardner kept showing up for his unpaid internship while sleeping in a shelter with his young son. Wilma Rudolph trained daily after being told she'd never walk. Volunteers during Hurricane Harvey paddled into deep, unknown waters because they believed there were still people who needed help. In all these moments, the first step wasn't about being sure. It was about believing it mattered. Kindness works in a circle. One person helps another, and that person goes on to help someone else. At a Dunkin' Donuts, customers once paid for the person behind them for hours straight. In Colorado, a farmer pulled a stranger's car from a snowbank because years earlier someone had done the same for him. Kindness doesn't shrink when you give it away. It grows. Courage works in the same way. It's not something reserved for a chosen few. It's a decision anyone can make when the moment calls for it. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. A student stepped in to stop a classmate from being bullied. A pilot landed on the Hudson River, saving everyone on board. These choices didn't just solve the problem at hand. They inspired others to act with courage in their own lives. Hope is the engine of innovation. When Apollo 13 malfunctioned, NASA engineers didn't quit. They found a way to bring the crew home safely. When schools closed, teachers created online lessons so students could keep learning. When small businesses faced collapse, they reinvented themselves to survive. Hope isn't blind optimism. It's the determination to keep searching for a way forward even when the odds are unclear. And legacy is the natural result of living these values every day. Fred Rogers spent decades planting seeds of kindness in the hearts of children. Harriet Tubman risked her life over and over to lead others to freedom. Jamie Escalante believed in his students until they believed in themselves. Legacy isn't just for the famous. Anyone who lives in a way that lifts others leaves one. These stories aren't here for us to admire from a distance. They're invitations to take part. You don't need money to be generous, power to be brave, or genius to be creative. All you need is the willingness to keep moving, whether that means helping, speaking up, trying something new, or planting a seed for the future. These qualities often come together. Perseverance leads to kindness. Kindness inspires courage. Courage sparks hope. Hope builds legacy. Each one strengthens the others. The more you practice one, the more the rest will grow. Think about the ripple you want to send out into the world. Could be in your family, your neighborhood, your school, or your workplace. Maybe it's a project you've been avoiding. Maybe it's a conversation you've been putting off. Maybe it's a good habit you've been meaning to start. Big changes often begin with the smallest steps. One day, someone might tell a story about you, that you helped without being asked, that you kept going when it would have been easier to quit, that you acted simply because you believed it was the right thing to do. Even if you never hear that story, it will live on in the people and places you've touched. In the end, legacy isn't measured by how long your name is remembered. It's measured by how deeply your impact is felt. And that's something you can start building right now. When people think of perseverance, they often imagine something dramatic. But some of the most powerful examples come from those whose names most people will never hear. Chris Gardner, the man behind The Pursuit of Happiness, was homeless with his young son while working at an unpaid internship. His persistence led to a career, financial stability, and the ability to give back. Wilma Rudolph was born prematurely, stricken with polio as a child, and told she'd never walk. She didn't just walk. She ran into history as the fastest woman alive, winning 3 Olympic gold medals. Second chances are also part of this story. A man once sentenced to life in prison now runs a program that teaches trades to at-risk youth. Colonel Sanders launched KFC at 65, proving that starting late doesn't mean you can't make an impact. In the tech world, failure often marks the path to success. James Dyson built more than 5,000 prototypes before creating the bagless vacuum. Michael Jordan has said his missed shots and lost games were what made him great. Some struggles stretch over decades. The fight for marriage equality in the United States reached its victory in 2015 after countless protests, legal battles, and quiet conversations at kitchen tables. Then there's the man in a rural town who was told it would take a year before he could walk again after a devastating accident. Through daily training, he crossed the football field at his daughter's graduation in just 7 months. Perseverance isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's the steady decision to keep going until you reach your goal. This same determination keeps communities alive through hardship. In rural America, farmers sometimes face years-long droughts or floods that wipe out entire seasons of crops. Even then, they're back in the fields when planting season comes. They plant not because they know the harvest will be good, but because they know that if they don't, there will be nothing at all. It's a form of hope grounded in reality. Gratitude often appears in these stories, and it's not always loud. In Detroit, when a young man's car broke down, he walked 21 miles to get to his first day of work. When his boss heard, he didn't just congratulate him. He gave him a new car. It wasn't just a gift. it was recognition of his dedication. Gratitude and generosity are closely linked. In small towns, firefighters sometimes receive handwritten thank you notes or trays of cookies after a rescue. These aren't publicity stunts. They're heartfelt acknowledgments of someone risking themselves for others. In business, gratitude can shape entire cultures. Douglas Conant, during his time as CEO of Campbell Soup, wrote more than 30,000 handwritten notes to employees. Each note was specific and sincere. That kind of attention built trust and improved performance across the company. Generosity often grows out of repaying a kindness. In 2020, when the pandemic forced his Chicago restaurant to close, an owner kept paying his employees in full. He remembered how they'd stood by him during the hard early days of the business and wanted to return the favor. Generosity can come from those with almost nothing to spare. In Philadelphia, a homeless man gave his last $20 to help a woman who was stranded without gas. That act sparked a fundraiser that gave him a fresh start. Even though the story later became more complicated, its beginning was a reminder that the value of a gift is often measured by the sacrifice it represents. Communities often act generously together. Parents raise money for school sports teams. Neighbors organize benefit dinners for families who've lost their homes to fires. Local musicians play concerts to help pay for someone's surgery. These are moments when no one is required to step up, yet people do, knowing that one day they might be the ones in need. When we talk about building a meaningful life, we often imagine something sweeping and grand. But more often, it's built from a steady stream of small acts. The poet Mary Oliver once asked, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" For some people, the answer is travel. For others, it's raising a family, starting a business, or mentoring someone younger. Whatever the choice, meaning comes from devoting yourself to what matters and from helping others along the way. In America, building a meaningful life often means balancing ambition with sustainability. Many have learned, sometimes the hard way, that working until you burn out can cost you the very goal you were chasing. The once glorified hustle culture has started to give way to sustainable ambition, working hard, but in a way that allows for rest, relationships, and health. Silicon Valley founders have learned to step back before hitting the point of collapse. Companies are starting to invest in mental health for their employees. The lesson is simple. Success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about how you live while achieving it. One example is Jim Goodnight, co-founder and CEO of SAS Institute. For decades, he's built a workplace that puts employee well-being first, offering on-site healthcare, childcare, and flexible schedules. The company still turns a profit. His belief is, if you treat employees as if they make a difference, they will. His career proves that investing in people pays off. The road to a meaningful life is rarely straight. It's more like weaving a tapestry from hundreds of threads, each representing an act of kindness, perseverance, gratitude, or courage. Over time, you can step back and see the bigger picture. These values aren't separate. They're woven together, each making the other stronger. Perseverance has shaped the American identity, from pioneers crossing mountains to modern entrepreneurs building businesses in their garages. While history often celebrates famous names, the stories that inspire us most often come from people we might never hear about. Chris Gardner's life is one of those stories. In the early 1980s, he was a failed salesman, homeless with his young son. Every day he put on a suit and went to an unpaid internship at a brokerage firm, sleeping in shelters or public restrooms at night. He had no promise of a job, but he kept showing up until he earned one. Wilma Rudolph's story carries the same spirit. Born prematurely and paralyzed by polio as a child, she was told she'd never walk. She didn't just walk. She ran into history, becoming the fastest woman in the world and winning 3 Olympic gold medals. These stories remind us that perseverance is often about the small, daily decision to keep going, even when the odds aren't in your favor. Second chances are also part of the American story. A man once serving life in prison was released and went on to lead a program teaching trades to at-risk youth, turning his past into a lesson and a source of hope. Colonel Sanders, after a lifetime of failures, started franchising KFC at the age of 65, proving that it's never too late to begin again. In the tech world, failure is often a stepping stone to success. James Dyson went through more than 5,000 prototypes before finally creating the bagless vacuum that made his name. Michael Jordan has said it was his thousands of missed shots and lost games that drove him to improve, showing that victory often grows from the lessons learned in defeat. Some challenges take decades to overcome. The U.S. movement for marriage equality succeeded in 2015 after years of protests, court cases, and personal conversations that slowly changed minds. In a rural town, a man recovering from a serious car accident was told it would take a year before he could walk again. 7 months later, through daily training, he crossed the football field at his daughter's graduation. Perseverance doesn't always look dramatic. It can be the quiet, persistent choice to keep going. Kindness between strangers often comes unexpectedly, but it's unforgettable. During Hurricane Harvey in 2017, hundreds of private fishing boats, jet skis, and rafts navigated flooded streets to rescue people. Many of the rescuers had traveled hundreds of miles with no expectation of payment or recognition. In the Midwest, when snow piles up, people with plows often clear driveways for neighbors who can't do it themselves. After wildfires in California, communities quickly organize donations and shelter for those who have lost everything. Kindness can also turn a miserable moment into something memorable. On a hot summer day in New York City, a subway train got stuck between stations. First, everyone sat in silence, waiting. Then someone shared a bottle of water. Another person handed out snacks. A few shared phone chargers. A man pulled out a guitar, and soon the car was filled with music. When the train started moving again, people were exchanging numbers and making plans to meet. Kindness can ripple outward. In Boston in 2012, a coffee shop customer paid for the person behind them. That gesture kept going for more than 1,000 customers. In some towns, a secret Santa pays off holiday layaway balances for families in need. The recipients never know who helped them, which somehow makes the gift feel even more meaningful. Sometimes kindness works best when it's organized. After the September 11th attacks, blood banks received so many donations in just a few days that they couldn't use them all right away. The Red Cross asked people to stagger donations over the coming weeks, ensuring a steady supply for hospitals long after the first wave of need. There are also moments when help arrives with perfect timing. In Colorado, a driver stranded in a snowstorm, without cell service, was losing hope when an old pickup appeared. A farmer got out, pulled his car free, refused payment and said, "I was helped like this once. Now it's my turn." These moments, big and small, shape communities where helping isn't rare. It's instinctive. That instinct flows into the idea of legacy. In its purest form, legacy isn't about statues or history books. It's about the lasting impact of your life. Fred Rogers spent decades teaching kindness and acceptance to children. When he died in 2003, the tributes that came in weren't about ratings or awards. They were about how people felt because of him. In the Midwest, legacy might be the land a family has farmed for generations, along with the values passed down about caring for it. In classrooms, teachers like Jamie Escalante inspired students to reach beyond what they thought possible, and his influence still echoes through those he taught and those they've taught in turn. Harriet Tubman risked her life repeatedly to lead people to freedom. She didn't live to see all the progress her courage made possible, but her name remains a symbol of moral strength. Chuck Feeney gave away almost all of his wealth to build schools, hospitals, and health programs, leaving behind benefits that will last for generations. Ordinary people build legacies too. A teacher planting trees year after year, a mechanic mentoring teens in car repair, a neighbor organizing a food drive that becomes a tradition. In the arts, Aretha Franklin, Johnny Cash, Maya Angelou, and John Steinbeck left behind work that still inspires because it carries not only talent but truth. Some legacies grow out of resilience. After September 11th, many first responders became ill from their work at Ground Zero. Some spent the rest of their lives fighting for healthcare for their peers. Even after they passed, the protections they won continued to help others. The thread that ties all of these stories together is consistency. Living your values in a way that will last beyond your lifetime. Legacy doesn't belong only to the famous or powerful. to something anyone can create, starting now. It's in the way you treat people, the habits you practice, and the choices you make when no one's watching. The truth is, you don't need certainty before you take the first step. Most of the stories we've talked about began with someone acting without knowing the outcome. What matters is deciding to move forward, to help, to stand up, or to start something you believe in. Perseverance, kindness, courage, hope, and legacy aren't just separate ideas. They connect, build on each other, and grow stronger together. The more you practice one, the more naturally the others follow. Someday someone might tell a story about you, that you helped when no one asked, that you kept going when it was easier to quit, that you did something simply because it mattered. You may never hear that story, but it will live on in the people and places you've touched. And in the end, legacy isn't about how long your name is remembered. It's about how deeply your impact is felt. That's something anyone can start building right now.